The reservoir did not return to peace immediately. What lay beneath the water had merely paused, like a beast wounded but not slain. The stone coffin, cracked and bleeding yin energy, still pulsed faintly at the reservoir's heart. Its ancient runes flickered erratically, no longer whole, no longer stable. Without reinforcement, it would shatter completely, and when it did, everything sealed within would surge forth without restraint. Longjia's voice echoed inside the protagonist's mind, heavy and commanding. The seal is broken. Suppression alone is no longer enough. The solution was brutal. They would force the coffin shut, not with talismans, not with chance, but with iron and sacrifice. Villagers were driven back from the shore. No one was allowed to witness what followed. The night grew unnaturally cold as chains, thick, rusted iron chains once used for anchoring floodgates, were dragged toward the reservoir. Each link was engraved with hastily carved sealing characters, their strokes uneven but desperate. Iron restrains flesh. But iron, when forged with intent, could also restrain souls. The protagonist stood trembling at the water's edge. His clothes were soaked, his lips blue, his breathing shallow. The yin he had consumed earlier churned violently within him, no longer flowing smoothly, but colliding with his remaining yang like a storm trapped inside fragile walls. "You cannot enter again," Longjia warned. "Your body is at its limit." The protagonist nodded faintly. "I know, but there was no alternative. If the coffin was not sealed now, the reservoir would become a gate of calamity. Every spirit drawn into it, past and future, would erupt outward, drowning the village not in water, but in resentment." The chains were lowered. As the iron touched the reservoir's surface, the water boiled. Screams erupted from below. One by one, the wronged souls were dragged back, not rising but pulled downward, screaming as if caught in a reverse tide. Faces surfaced briefly. Men, women, children, their expressions frozen in terror and fury, before being yanked beneath the surface again. The reservoir became a vortex. The chains tightened. The stone coffin resisted. Cracks spread wider. Ancient runes shattered entirely, releasing a surge of yin so dense it distorted the air. The protagonist felt it instantly, like knives stabbing into his chest, ripping through his meridians. Blood spilled freely from his mouth. His legs buckled. He fell to one knee, hands clawing into the mud to remain upright. "Now," Longjia said grimly, "anchor it." With the last of his strength, the protagonist forced himself forward, gripping the iron chain with both hands. The moment he made contact, the yin surged violently into him, attempting to use his body as an escape route. Pain erased thought. His vision went white. The boundary between flesh and spirit blurred completely. For an instant, he was no longer standing at the reservoir. He was inside the coffin, surrounded by countless overlapping resentments. Voices screamed in his ears, pleas, curses, memories of betrayal and injustice stacked endlessly upon one another. The weight of it crushed his consciousness, pressing him toward dissolution. "Hold," Longjia commanded, his voice strained. "Do not let go." The protagonist bit down hard, teeth cracking against one another. He held. Using the last fragments of his nine-yang constitution, he forced a circulation pattern no sane cultivator would attempt, driving yang directly against the yin surge, not to destroy it, but to lock it in place. The chains glowed faintly red. The coffin shuddered. Then, slowly, it sank. The stone coffin was dragged downward, the chains wrapping around it, layer by layer, sealing it shut through sheer force. The vortex collapsed inward, sucking every remaining wandering soul back into the reservoir's depths. One final ear-splitting scream echoed. Then silence. The water stilled. The moon's reflection returned, trembling but intact. The reservoir was sealed. Only then did the protagonist collapse. His grip loosened, the chains went slack. He fell face first into the mud, unmoving. For a terrifying moment, there was no breath, no pulse. Longjia's presence flared violently inside him, attempting to stabilize what remained, but even the Dragon Lord hesitated. "This body," Longjia muttered, "has crossed too far." From the darkness, footsteps rushed forward. Su Qiao knelt beside him, her expression sharp with urgency. Without hesitation, she pressed her palm against his back, channeling what little refined yin she could spare. Not to overwhelm, but to cool the internal chaos threatening to tear him apart. At the same time, an old villager, one who had remained hidden, threw a talisman onto the protagonist's chest, its symbols burning away, instantly but buying a single breath. Air rushed into his lungs. The protagonist coughed violently, blood splattering the ground as consciousness clawed its way back. He lived, barely. The price was written immediately. His meridians were shattered in multiple places. The nine-yang constitution no longer flowed freely. Its brilliance dimmed, fractured into unstable currents. What had once been a heaven-defying physique was now incomplete, dangerously so. But the reservoir held. The stone coffin remained sealed beneath layers of iron and water. For now. As dawn broke over the mountains, pale light touched the surface of the reservoir, revealing nothing of the horror buried below. Birds returned hesitantly. The wind moved again. To the village, it appeared that the calamity had passed. Only those who stood at the water's edge that night knew the truth. This was not victory, it was survival. The protagonist lay weakly on the shore, eyes half open, staring at the sky. Life and death had brushed past him on a single thread. And though the reservoir was temporarily at peace, the consequences of that night had already begun to ripple outward, quietly, inexorably, into a world that would no longer ignore him. The calm that followed the night at the reservoir was not the kind that brought relief. It was the kind that unsettled the soul. For days afterward, the mountain paths remained empty. No wandering spirits appeared at dusk. No whispers followed travelers home. Even the stray dogs that once howled at unseen presences fell silent, curling up beside doorsteps as if something vast and watchful had passed through and left behind a lingering pressure. The world felt muted. Su Qiao noticed it first. She stood at the edge of the village, staring toward the mountains she once called home. The peaks were shrouded in thin mist, their outlines distant and unfamiliar, as though a veil had been drawn between her and the paths she had walked for centuries. "I can't go back," she said quietly. The words carried no panic, only certainty. Her connection to the mountain had been severed the moment she stepped into the reservoir's karmic storm. The seal, the chains, the sacrifice, they had altered the spiritual terrain. The mountain behind her was no longer a sanctuary. To return would be to walk directly into rejection, or worse, erasure. The protagonist understood without needing explanation. She had crossed a boundary that could not be retraced. "You were never meant to stay among humans," he said. Su Qiao smiled faintly. and yet I no longer belong anywhere else. There was no drama in the statement, just an acknowledgement of consequence. Long Jia, silent for most of the morning, finally spoke as the sun climbed higher. "This is not the end," the Dragon Lord said. "What you sealed was not the source, only an outlet." The words settled heavily. The protagonist turned inward, bracing himself. "What do you mean, Long?" Jia's presence shifted, coiling deeper within his consciousness, ancient and wary. "Feng Shan," he said. The name carried weight, an echo that stirred unease even before meaning fully formed. "A sealed mountain," Longjia continued, "a convergence point of buried calamities. Long before this village existed, long before blood debts accumulated, something was imprisoned there. What lay beneath the reservoir was merely an extension, a pressure valve." The protagonist felt a chill. "So the reservoir was never meant to hold forever," Longjia replied, "only to delay." The unnatural stillness surrounding them now made sense. The Yin realm was not peaceful, it was holding its breath. Normally, after such a massive disturbance, wandering spirits would surge, seeking new paths, new anchors. Instead, there was nothing. No echoes, no backlash. An experienced cultivator would have recognized the danger immediately. Silence like this meant one thing: everything was being drawn elsewhere. At night, the protagonist tested the boundaries himself. He walked the familiar paths, extending his damaged senses into the unseen layers of the world. Where once faint shadows flickered and residual emotions clung to objects, there was now emptiness, too clean, too orderly, as though the land had been swept clear in preparation. "This is worse than chaos," he murmured. Long Jia agreed. "When yin moves with purpose," the Dragon Lord said, "it no longer behaves like resentment, it becomes intent." Su Qiao remained close in the days that followed, though she kept her distance from the villagers. Her presence had changed. The sharp, oppressive aura that once marked her as a mountain spirit had softened, but in its place was something more dangerous: instability. Without a mountain to anchor her, her existence had become unmoored. "If Feng Shan stirs," she said one evening, "it will draw everything without roots." She meant herself. And others like her. The protagonist clenched his fists. "I won't let that happen." The words came out before he had fully thought them through. Long Jia did not correct him. Instead, the Dragon Lord issued a warning. "You no longer possess the strength you once did," he said. "Your nine-yang constitution is fractured. You can no longer stand at the center of calamity and survive unscathed." The truth of it stung. The protagonist felt it every time he circulated energy. How the flow hesitated, how gaps formed where seamless power once surged. He was alive, but diminished, and yet fate had not released him. It had tightened its grip. The village elders began to notice the signs as well. Crops grew strangely uniform, healthy but lacking variation, as though guided by an invisible hand. Dreams became rare. Even children stopped speaking of imaginary friends or shadows in the corners of rooms. To ordinary people, it seemed like peace. To those who understood, it was a warning. Tranquility enforced from below was never benign. "The suppression is temporary," Longjia said one final time, his voice carrying a rare hint of gravity. "What you sealed will eventually push back, and when it does, it will seek resolution, not delay." The protagonist stared toward the distant mountains, where mist coiled unnaturally around a single, barely visible peak. Feng Shan. Whatever slept there was not finished. The reservoir had bought them time, nothing more. As night fell, the silence deepened, not broken by insects, not disturbed by wind. It pressed down like a held breath, waiting for the moment it could finally be released. Somewhere beyond the village, beyond sight and sound, a greater calamity was forming. And when it emerged, the echoes of this night would no longer be enough to contain it.